Imagine a war criminal sentenced to hang, only to walk free, and disappear in fire. Joachim Peiper was condemned for one of the worst massacres of World War II. Yet Cold War politics spared his life. Decades later, his house erupted in an inferno, leaving behind a charred corpse. But no one could prove it was him. Was it vengeance? Was it escape? Or was the world fooled by history's darkest illusion? The night was silent, broken only by the crackle of flames. Deep in the forests of eastern France, a stone house stood ablaze, its roof collapsing into a storm of sparks. Inside, firefighters would later find a body, charred, twisted, shrunken into something barely human. The corpse was blackened beyond recognition. Only the scorched metal of a wristwatch, frozen at 1 o'clock in the morning, gave any sense of time, but not of identity. The locals whispered the name with fear. Joachim Peiper, former SS officer, a man once celebrated by Nazi propaganda as a warrior, yet remembered by history as the Butcher of Malmedy, a man who had marched through Europe leaving trails of fire and blood. Now, in the summer of 1976, he was said to have burned alive in his own home. And yet, doubts immediately spread. The scene was too strange, too staged. A cut fence on the edge of the garden, bullet casings scattered in the yard, a Molotov cocktail left unused. Some claimed he had been hunted down by vengeful partisans. Others believed he had orchestrated his own disappearance, slipping into the night as the flames consumed a decoy. The question still lingers. Did Joachim Peiper truly die in that fire, or was it his final act of manipulation? To understand how this man came to be both feared and despised, how his name became synonymous with brutality, and how his end remains cloaked in mystery, we must return to the beginning. To Berlin. To 1915. To the birth of a child who would grow into one of the darkest figures of the Second World War. Germany already scarred by loss, into a family wrapped in the tradition of military honor and rigid discipline. His father, a former officer of the Imperial Army, embodied the old ideals of Kaiser and fatherland. In their household, uniforms, medals, and the echo of marching boots were not relics of the past. They were the very air young Joachim breathed. Tragedy marked his youth as much as duty. One brother died mysteriously in Poland during the war. Another succumbed slowly to illness and despair, leaving the family haunted by silence and grief. For Joachim, these shadows did not break him. They sharpened him, cold, ambitious, determined to rise where others had fallen. As a teenager, he marched in the ranks of the Hitler Youth, chanting slogans of loyalty, his eyes fixed on a future where service to the Reich promised glory. At just 18, he volunteered for the Schutzstaffel, the SS. This was no ordinary enlistment. The SS was the steel heart of the Nazi movement, the order built on obedience, secrecy, and ruthless ideology. And Peiper was ready to embrace it fully. Fate intervened in 1934, at a grand parade in Nuremberg. Heinrich Himmler, head of the SS, noticed the young recruit. Peiper was not physically imposing, slender, dark-haired, with striking eyes, but there was something chilling in his presence. A confidence, a quiet arrogance. Himmler chose him. From that moment, Peiper was drawn into the inner circle of power. Trained not just as a soldier, but as an aide, a messenger of secrets, he became the man who carried Himmler's orders, who listened, who learned. The boy from Berlin was no longer just another recruit. He was being molded into the right hand of one of the architects of genocide. By the late 1930s, Europe trembled on the edge of war. Peiper stood ready. He was not content with being a shadow behind the desk. He longed for the battlefield, for fire and steel, for the chance to carve his name in history. Behind his calm, handsome face was an ambition sharpened into something deadly. He was the son of a soldier, the disciple of Himmler, a man already shaped by tragedy, loyalty, and ruthless belief. Joachim Peiper was no longer just a youth in uniform. He was becoming the embodiment of the dark promise of the SS, a promise that would soon plunge him and countless others into blood and fire. When war erupted in September 1939, Joachim Peiper was not a nameless officer lost in the chaos of mobilization. He was at the side of Heinrich Himmler, the SS chief whose shadow stretched across Europe. As aide and adjutant, Peiper followed his master into Poland, carrying files, relaying orders, and watching with cold eyes as entire villages were wiped from the map. He saw Jews and intellectuals dragged into fields, lined up before ditches, and executed in waves of gunfire. For others, the horror might have been unbearable. For Peiper, it was a lesson, a brutal education in the machinery of extermination. By 1940, he accompanied Himmler on tours of the concentration camps, Dachau, Buchenwald, and the new camps rising in occupied Poland. Behind barbed wire, skeletal prisoners shuffled under the gaze of guards. Peiper was there, observing, absorbing. But in his heart, he craved something more. He did not want to remain a secretary to death. He wanted to wield it with his own hands. That wish was granted. Peiper transferred into the Waffen-SS, into the armored divisions destined for the front. In France, he commanded a mechanized company. His reputation grew quickly. He was daring in combat, efficient in destruction, and merciless to those who stood in his way. His men feared him. His superiors praised him. The Nazi press began to paint him as the model SS officer. Handsome, fearless, ruthless. Yet behind the medals lay fire and blood. When partisan fighters captured 2 German soldiers in Italy, Peiper issued an ultimatum: release them, or the entire town would burn. The prisoners were freed. But he gave the order anyway. 24 civilians were executed. Homes were shelled into rubble. The message was clear. Mercy had no place in his command. On the Eastern Front, his cruelty only deepened. Villages in Ukraine were scorched. Survivors spoke of old men shot in the streets, of women and children dragged from their homes and slaughtered. Peiper's battalion became a symbol of terror, its advance marked by smoke rising against the horizon. And yet within the SS, he was celebrated. In 1943, he received the Knight's Cross of the Iron Cross, the highest decoration the Reich could give. Propaganda photographers captured him smiling, the perfect warrior for a crumbling empire. But those who truly knew his legacy understood the truth, that his fame was built not only on daring maneuvers, but on atrocities committed with cold calculation. Peiper was no longer simply the adjutant of Himmler. He had become something else, a commander who fused military brilliance with unflinching brutality, a man who walked with medals on his chest and the ashes of innocence in his wake. By the close of 1943, whispers spread among comrades and enemies alike. To the Germans, he was both admired and feared. To the Allies, he was the embodiment of the SS nightmare. Joachim Peiper had stepped fully onto the battlefield, and the world would soon learn his name in terror. December 1944. The Reich was crumbling. Allied forces had broken through France, pushing relentlessly toward Germany's borders. Hitler, desperate for a miracle, launched one last gamble, the Ardennes offensive. The world would remember it as the Battle of the Bulge. Snow-covered forests, frozen roads. And at the spearhead of the attack, Joachim Peiper. His unit, the 1st SS Panzer Regiment, was chosen to drive deep into American lines, to break supply routes and seize bridges. Peiper was no longer just a decorated officer. He was the point of the spear, the one expected to bring the fury of the SS into the heart of the Allied advance. On December 17th, his armored column thundered into the small Belgian town of Malmedy. There, they encountered a convoy of American troops, supply vehicles, light armor, men unprepared for the sudden storm of German steel. A brief firefight erupted. Outgunned, the Americans surrendered. More than 100 soldiers, hands raised, were rounded up and marched into a snow-covered field. What happened next became one of the most infamous atrocities of the war. Without warning, German machine guns opened fire. The air cracked with gunshots. Men collapsed in heaps, their blood soaking into the snow. Some tried to run. They were cut down. Others pretended to be dead, bodies trembling under the weight of fallen comrades. 84 Americans were executed in that field, their lives extinguished in an instant. The massacre did not end there. Over the following days, as Peiper's column advanced, villages burned, civilians were shot, prisoners were executed. By the time his unit was forced to retreat, the toll was staggering: 362 prisoners of war and 111 civilians murdered. Cold, systematic, merciless. News of the massacre spread quickly among Allied lines. Survivors staggered back through the snow, faces pale with shock, recounting the horror. Their words lit a fire of anger. American units fought with renewed fury, vowing never to surrender to the SS. To them, Peiper's name became synonymous with betrayal and slaughter. Yet within Nazi circles, Peiper was still praised. He had driven his men hard, striking deep behind Allied lines, pushing farther than any other SS unit. His ruthlessness was seen as resolve. His crimes were cloaked in the language of war. But Peiper himself could not escape the shadow he had created. When the offensive collapsed and his tanks ran out of fuel, he abandoned his vehicles and led his men on foot through the forests of the Ardennes, starving, freezing, hunted. He left behind burned-out armor, frozen corpses, and the memory of Malmedy. For the Allies, Malmedy became more than a battlefield atrocity. It was proof of the SS creed, of the darkness that defined Hitler's chosen elite. For history, it became the turning point in Peiper's story, the moment when he ceased to be merely a ruthless commander and became forever branded as a war criminal. The field at Malmedy remained silent after the snow melted. Bodies were recovered. Graves were dug. Investigators marked bullet holes in helmets, shattered bones, and the empty shells of machine gun fire. Each piece of evidence pointed back to the same name: Joachim Peiper. The massacre was not an accident. It was not chaos. It was an execution. And the world would not forget. By the spring of 1945, the dream of the Reich was collapsing into ash. The Ardennes gamble had failed. Fuel was gone. Tanks lay abandoned in frozen fields, and Peiper's once proud column was nothing more than scattered remnants. He led survivors on foot through the forests, trudging across snow and ice, leaving behind wreckage and bodies. What was once hailed as the elite spearhead of the SS was now a broken, hunted band. When Germany finally surrendered, Peiper shed his insignia, disguising himself among civilians. But there was no escape. The investigators of the United States Army were already piecing together the puzzle of Malmedy. Survivors had testified. Evidence had been collected. Mass graves had been exhumed. Each road led back to one man, the commander who had unleashed slaughter in the Ardennes. On August 21, 1945, Joachim Peiper was captured. No longer the decorated officer, he was dragged from obscurity, mud on his boots, eyes still cold, and placed in a cell. The irony was chilling. He was confined within Dachau, the very camp that once symbolized Nazi terror, now a prison for its architects. In May 1946, the trial began. 74 defendants, officers and men of the Waffen-SS, stood accused of war crimes. At the center was Peiper. The courtroom brimmed with witnesses, photographs, sworn statements, bullet-riddled helmets taken from the field at Malmedy. Survivors pointed at him. Prosecutors described the calculated murder of prisoners. The evidence rose like a mountain, impossible to climb. Peiper, however, remained composed. He argued that confessions had been extracted under torture. He insisted the dead were partisans, not innocents. He stood tall, speaking with the assurance of a diplomat rather than a man on trial for his life. But beneath his defiance, the facts could not be erased. 84 American bodies in the snow, hundreds more civilians and prisoners executed under his command. On July 16, 1946, judgment was passed. Peiper was sentenced to death by hanging. The verdict seemed to close the chapter, a reckoning for the butcher of Malmedy. For many, justice had finally spoken. Yet history shifted once again. As the Cold War hardened, the politics of punishment grew complicated. West Germany became a vital ally. Executions of former SS officers threatened fragile alliances. Pressure mounted. Within months, death sentences were commuted. Peiper's penalty became life in prison, then 35 years, and finally, release. For the families of the dead, the decision was a betrayal. For Peiper, it was survival. He had walked through fire, through evidence and condemnation, and yet emerged alive. The gallows remained empty. He would spend a decade behind bars, but the noose was gone. And when he stepped out of prison in 1956, Joachim Peiper was no longer a condemned criminal. He was a free man, a man whose crimes had been proven, whose guilt was carved into history, yet who was allowed to breathe the air of peace. The world had waited for justice. Instead, it had released a shadow back into daylight. In 1956, Joachim Peiper walked out of prison. The man condemned as a war criminal, the officer sentenced to hang, now stepped into the light of post-war Europe as a free citizen. For many, his release was nothing short of a scandal. For Peiper, it was survival. He had cheated the gallows. But freedom was not the same as redemption. He tried to rebuild a life in West Germany. Industry was booming, companies were hiring, and the nation was desperate to move forward. Yet wherever Peiper went, the past followed. At Porsche, whispers spread among workers. They recognized him, not as a colleague, but as the butcher of Malmedy. At Volkswagen, the same. Former soldiers, former prisoners, men who knew his name, refused to work beside him. Within weeks, he was dismissed. His reputation was poison, a stain that no company wanted on its payroll. Still, he did not hide. He lived quietly with his wife and children, writing, translating military texts, staying in contact with former comrades. And in 1967, he revealed the truth of his heart. In an interview with the French press, he declared with chilling clarity, "I was a National Socialist. I am still a National Socialist." There was no remorse, no regret, no apology for the hundreds of prisoners and civilians whose blood had marked his path. This open defiance shocked a world that hoped for contrition. But Peiper did not care. He mocked West Germany as weak, calling it a mere province of Europe. He expressed disdain for the democratic future his country had chosen. To him, the Reich had fallen, but its ideals had not died. By the early 1970s, he retreated deeper into obscurity. He moved to France, to a remote village called Trave in Burgundy. There, among stone houses and quiet forests, he tried to vanish. To the villagers, he was just an aging German, a translator of military documents, reserved, polite, distant. But authorities knew exactly who he was. In time, others learned the truth. Former resistance fighters, journalists, and historians uncovered his identity. His neighbors read the headlines. "A Nazi war criminal lives among us." Leaflets circulated, accusing him of murder. The past he thought he had buried now marched to his very doorstep. Threats began. Anonymous letters promised fire. Telephone calls delivered warnings. His wife and children returned to Germany for safety, but Peiper stayed. Proud, defiant, alone. Even in exile, he remained what he had always been, a man loyal to the darkness of his youth, unwilling to repent, unwilling to flee. A man haunted not by guilt, but by enemies who refused to let him disappear. The world he entered after prison was not the world he had left behind in 1945. But for Joachim Peiper, one truth never changed. He was still at war, not on the battlefield, but with history itself. July 13th, 1976. On the eve of France's national holiday, the village of Trave lay silent under a summer sky. In a lonely stone house at the edge of the forest, Joachim Peiper sat awake. His wife and children were gone, sent back to Germany for safety. The air was heavy with unease. On the table before him lay a pistol, a shotgun, and a scattering of cartridges. Outside, the night pressed in. For years he had lived as a shadow. Now the shadow had come to claim him. At 11:30 p.m., flames erupted from the roof. Within minutes, the house was an inferno. Neighbors rushed to call the fire brigade, but by the time help arrived, the blaze had consumed everything. The walls collapsed, timbers cracked, glass shattered. When the fire was finally extinguished, only smoldering ruins remained. And in those ruins, a body. It was twisted, burned black, barely more than 60 centimeters long, shrunken by heat. Next to it lay the pistol and the shotgun. Both fired. On his wrist, a melted watch, frozen at 1 o'clock in the morning. But was it Joachim Peiper? The question lingered. The evidence was strange. A fence on the edge of the property had been cut. Shell casings lay scattered in the garden, as though Peiper had fired outward. A Molotov cocktail was discovered inside. Unused. Gasoline had been splashed across the walls. Yet investigators found no bullets fired into the house, no footprints leading in. There was no conclusive proof of an intruder. Rumors spread quickly. Some said left-wing militants, calling themselves Avengers, had carried out an execution by fire. Others believed it was a staged death, that Peiper had prepared the blaze himself, leaving behind a false corpse and vanishing into the forest. The burned body was too damaged to be identified. No dental records, no DNA testing, only speculation. French police eventually closed the case. The final report admitted the truth. Nothing could prove the corpse was Peiper. Nothing could disprove it either. Officially, he was declared dead. But unofficially, the mystery remained. Did the butcher of Malmedy truly perish in fire? Or did he slip away once more, a phantom returning to the darkness that had always sheltered him? Today, a grave in Bavaria bears his name. The stone is simple, unremarkable. But visitors to the cemetery often ask the same question. Who lies beneath? A war criminal consumed by the flames of vengeance? Or an empty tomb marking the escape of a man who defied justice until the very end? What cannot be doubted is the legacy he left behind. Peiper never repented, never apologized. In life, he was the embodiment of the SS creed, ambitious, disciplined, and merciless. In death or in disappearance, he became a symbol of the unresolved ghosts of the war. The fire that night in Traves did not simply consume a house. It illuminated the shadows of Europe's past, reminding the world that some crimes leave scars too deep to heal, some men too dangerous to be forgotten. Joachim Peiper's story doesn't end with certainty. It ends with smoke, with unanswered questions, with a grave that may or may not hold his bones. But the memory of his crimes, the terror he inspired, and the darkness he carried, those remain. And perhaps that is the final truth. Some monsters do not vanish with death. They linger, haunting history itself, forever burning in the shadows of war.